previous videos we've went over the packages and connectors, cell sources, cell dynamics, how we associate and bind information in real or persistent manner. And now what we're going to go over is the rules interface and also the rules engine. What you'll see is we'll pick up where we left off with the for data provider that we had built in previous videos. And you can see we offer the whole, the whole cell hierarchy of wherever the sources came from. And let's take a step further. We'll see to create this end result across these sources, whether it was flat file, Excel, SQL database, Microsoft Access in this case, the associations that we've bound to get to this point. But there's also the idea of rules themselves, and we all know this. In data integration, transformations are very important. So let's take a look at one of these different objects. And as mentioned in previous videos, remember we were not just database centric, but we recognize business processes, APIs, in different structures of information. So let's take a look at, first we'll handle SQL Server. So let's just, for example, basic SQL Server 2008 that we're seeing. You can see that the structure that's available, all the tables and columns that you can see are being offered are based on that cell that it was created by. Now we can go into individual columns, objects, say we want to offer the average of first quarter payment, for example, and then go farther down the list of transformations, use, invoice, whatever the cases are. Now, as mentioned, besides being database centric, that still holds true to non-database data sources. And let's take a look at Wachovia Payments Unstructured Flat File. Now, if I connect to this source, I should also be able to define rules at our cells level. So, for example, the same holds true that since we've taken this information and put this into data that we're aware of inside of DataRoket, we can do any type of manipulation across any source of information that we have a connector to. You can see we go farther down the list. Now, one more thing too that we want to mention besides the rules and how we save these rules is that there's also the idea of lookup maps. And the interface is just somewhat basic, but the idea of a lookup map itself, you can see financials in general ledgers and accounts. Let's take a look at one of the SQL data servers where our database sits. Let me see. Now, what we've done, and this is based on a properties file, so this can be changed, but we've told DataRoket that in the DR access table on this database, there's going to be several lookup tables that are based on mappings. And mappings being one data set associated to another. Because in the real world of information, there's many times where keys and associations can be built to cross data sets. But there also comes the time when you have data in source 1, they may be 03596. But based on a lookup, some kind of mapping, that value or that key may be 3956 or some other value set in data source 2. So this is the idea of lookup maps. So for example, in our data sources here, and I'll take a step back on two individuals in particular. Let me go back to our cells and our queries. If you remember, there are two data sources that we've performed binds, and I had mentioned these are multi-million row binds. Let me see if we can take a look at the query itself. Multi-million rows from Oracle, multi-million rows from SQL, and we bind the data based on unique key mapping. And let me go ahead and we'll take a look at the SQL query just to show it. And you can see that these are the different queries. Now, these can be driven then because we have associations that, for example, let's take a look at one of the bindings that came from these two associations. And you can see, let me do a get childs. And these are smaller column sets, but literally, let me zoom in a little bit. These data sets were created, these two different sources were created to deliver this end cell. So literally, if I went into the lookup itself and said, okay, well, I have source 1, and I choose this different type of accounts. We have lookup tables. I have source 1, I have source 2, but let me take a look at this table. You can see in this case this is really a one-to-one scenario that you can see this is the unique key in the SQL data source we just took a look at compared to the Oracle data source. But what this does is during the time of binding the two data sources, we replace that key lookup with information that's been derived from these lookup tables. We read that data. In this case, it's 1,000,000 rows, so we read that data. So let me take a look, for example. And literally, this would be a one-to-one relationship of what you bound together, the row sets. So it's a little bit over 1.1 million rows. So during that time of binding process, we replace those key lookups with choices that we've decided from the different ledgers, accounts, financials that are available. So let's just go ahead in this example and save a binding lookup. Let's go ahead and say Oracle Ledgers, which is one of the cases. We'll put several rules or transformations to this. And let's just take any ID is fine. And perhaps the average of either ID, or I can pull another table, or another column, sorry. So let's use net. So that's what I'm setting this to. I can go down the list and keep going and choosing whatever I'd like to. Also, by the way, freehand SQL is available. Let me say I want this lookup to be against accounts, and yet I can save this. Let me save this rule as DP2. And what we've done is we've created a schema now. Now that schema is bound to this cell selection. So at this point, if I went back and mentioned in previous videos, this is actually the real time and this is our persisted cells. We offer both. If I went back to this and I said, let me go ahead and generate cell, what's being picked up at that time will be the rule during that association, and that's where the lookup is. And as in the example, you can see that we've left it to one-to-one association. What we've been doing is we've been using general ledgers as a test bed also for now these different lookup associations from one general ledger across PeopleSoft, for example, to another one across Dynamics, Great Plains, which we'll release in a video soon. Thank you for your time.